it seems that maybe some people didn't really listen to
Yeah, sure. Well,
what was going on.
Parenting has always been hard. I mean, if
Yep.
we go back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had their challenges when you think about Cain and Abel. But certainly we are faced with the unique challenges that no generation has ever faced before with the digital age.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back today with another great guest. His name is Phillip Telfer, and we are going to be talking about a subject that I think every single one of us can relate to. It doesn't have to do specifically with homeschooling, but it's something that every homeschool family deals with. We're going to talk about digital distractions and what this looks like in our families today, what we can do to kind of bring back the family and not be so distracted by this crazy digital age that we are in and that most of us have lived in for quite a long time. So Phillip, I am so glad to have you with me today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Yvette. I'm glad to join you.
Yeah, absolutely. We met you several years ago at the Christian Worldview Film Festival.
Yes.
And that is an incredible event that our family has really enjoyed. One of the things, and just really quickly on that, because we're not talking so much about the film festival, but one of the things that each time Garrett and I have gone, we've come away with so much encouragement in regards to using our gifts and talents that God has given us to impact his kingdom. We hear it every time someone's up on that stage speaking, that's what we hear. Like, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing to impact God's kingdom? And so we love that. I love that it's so focused on a biblical worldview, which is exactly what it is. A Christian worldview and using media, whether it's movies or podcasts, or you guys really focus more on the movie.
Yes.
TV side of things. But it's such an incredible ministry that you have. But that's not the only ministry God has put in your lap. You have many. So I would love for you to tell our audience about what the Lord is doing with you, kind of introduce us to your family and some of the things that you're doing to impact God's kingdom.
Sure. First and foremost, since this is a homeschool audience, I'm a homeschool dad, 100%. We homeschooled through high school. And my wife and I were newlyweds when I'm so blessed that we actually met somebody in the state of Oregon, where I grew up. And I did not grow up knowing anything about homeschooling. I wished I had been homeschooled, but it wasn't until I was married when we encountered a family that homeschooled. And I remember leaving their house that evening and talking with my wife, Mary, and saying, are we on some sort of government watch list? Is this legal? This was, but I did tell her, I said, you know what? I don't know if this is legal. I don't know if we've gotten ourselves into some trouble by even meeting with these people. That's how ignorant I was. I said, but that was the first time I've ever had an intelligent conversation with an 8-year-old. There's something that's like really positive about this. And it definitely was the seed that was planted. And we continued to learn more and more about homeschooling. And really, our purpose from the very beginning was to have we have the privilege and the opportunity to disciple our children,
right, and
not just give them over to a government school to be indoctrinated against God, against biblical values, against the family, and so much more. It's in the last 20 years, things have gotten worse. So I'm just grateful. So that was kind of our journey and foray into homeschool. And as you know, homeschool, a mentality which is countercultural, is just like it begins to be the tip of the iceberg. As soon as you kind of put your feet in those waters, all of a sudden there are a lot of things that begin to change in your life. And so, but yeah, for many years, I've been involved in ministry for over 30 years. My wife and I met in Chicago through an inner city ministry, and I moved there from the state of Oregon in order to serve inner city youth and work with a local church. I interned at a church for the summer, working with inner city camps and the gang kids on our block, and wherever I could serve. I was 18 years old and just loved the Lord and wanted to do something for the kingdom. And then, but the church that I worked for, they kept me on staff. They gave me a job as a custodian. So I got my first ministry position as a janitor. Nice. And my wife was actually the secretary of the church. So we worked together, fell in love, got married, and now we will be celebrating 30 years.
Wow.
And God has blessed us with 4 children. I have one adult child who's out of the home, married, and has 2 children of her own. So I'm a grandfather. And I have 3 teens still in the home. My 19-year-old son is graduated from high school. He's working full-time, but still living at home. And then I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old daughter. So we're still in the thick of it. And I'm very grateful for ministries like this that support homeschooling.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we love it. There's nothing else I would rather be podcasting about than homeschooling and bringing this encouragement to our audience. And we always are just in awe of how the Lord has used this podcast to reach the hearts of people all around the world. That's what's incredible is, I could stand on a stage and talk to people all day long, but you get a very small audience when you do that. And being on a podcast, you get to reach people,
yes,
across the ocean. It's amazing.
As you know, as you mentioned, the film festival, I'm a big believer in what I'd refer to as broadcast ministry. Mm-hmm. And, broadcasting, people don't realize that the term broadcast was adopted by radio first, so that's usually what we're familiar with the television broadcast, radio broadcast, and now podcasts. But it's an agricultural term. Radio borrowed it from farming. Broadcasting is how you cast seeds. There are different ways, but the age-old way of scattering seed, and Jesus talked about that. A sower went out to sow his seed. That's called broadcasting.
I did not know that.
You just scatter seed. And so radio first adopted that because they weren't sure. They were sending out these radio waves and didn't know who was actually listening. And but now with podcasts, it's great because you can actually track who's going with you. But yeah, I've had an interest in media and entertainment on 2 sides of the coin, which you're familiar with, the film festival. Mm-hmm. And then today on our subject of regaining focus, I've spent a lot of, in fact, since 2003, I've been speaking nationally on the subject of media discernment, beginning with speaking to youth particularly, and then to their parents. Yeah. And then later on, I think it was in 2007 when I began to speak to homeschoolers about this. And I was hesitant at first. I had several homeschool leaders that I was friends with, and they were saying, "Hey, Phillip, you really ought to consider, you're traveling the country and you're speaking at Christian schools and churches and these youth events. Why don't you speak to homeschoolers?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of preaching to the choir, isn't it? I mean, don't they have their act together?" And they'd kind of look at me cross-eyed and say, "Well, you might be a little naive on that." So I got my first opportunity to speak at a homeschool conference in 2007, and my eyes were really open. The feedback I received, not only from the youth, but the adults, I realized this is an important message. And so I've continued to both minister inside and outside the homeschool community, but I love being able to help in this particular area of life.
Yeah, it's an important topic that we definitely need to talk about. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Are you looking for a fantastic online math program that removes the burden of teaching math? Then Teaching Textbooks is for you. Our family's been using teaching textbooks for years, and we couldn't be happier. Our girls say that it makes learning math fun, like a game, and they love that it's interactive. Teaching Textbooks uses step-by-step video instruction and does all the grading for you. The newest version is available now with an app that even works offline. Sign up for the first 15 lessons for free at teachingtextbooks.com. That's teachingtextbooks.com. We are back with Phillip Telfer, and before the break, you were talking about how you kind of discovered that homeschoolers actually need to talk about these things, talk about, how they can regain focus with digital distractions, which is your talk that you give at homeschool conferences. And, I know that years ago, and I would love for you to kind of talk about this, that there were a lot of people who saw the writing on the wall. they saw what was coming. And, I wouldn't call them a prophet, but sometimes it's kind of easy to see, well, this is where you're heading, and this is the direction our nation is headed in our culture. And these could be the effects, both good and bad, of these things. And so there were some people who were maybe sounding off sirens and saying, hey, whoa, wait, people, wake up, wake up. Talk a little bit about that, because it seems that maybe some people didn't really listen to what was going on.
Parenting has always been hard. I mean, if we go back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had their challenges when you think about Cain and Abel. But certainly we are faced with the unique challenges that no generation has ever faced before. With the digital age and especially with the smartphone. When I began speaking on this subject in 2003 around the country, there were no smartphones at the time. There was not Facebook, Twitter, Netflix. There were a lot of things now that just are a regular, occurrence in people's lives every day that didn't even exist in 2003. And I was still sounding the alarm back then. And of course, I was not by far the first person. Just I had picked up on the trail of other people. And when you think of Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, published in 1984 or 1985, somewhere around there, you can read it today, and it's a timeless classic now. And I can't imagine what Neil Postman would have thought if he saw where we've gone today. So the statistics are overwhelming. When I was most recently saw some by the CDC on how many hours young people spend in ages 10 to 12, or maybe it's 10 to 14. I think it's 8 to 10. So children 8 to 10 spend 6 hours a day consuming entertainment media. So that's not doing homework or school. And of course, we're not talking about homeschool kids, but I'll bring up a really important point about that. But these are just national statistics, and children ages 11 through 14 is the worst age bracket right now. They spend about 9 hours a day consuming entertainment media, and that's not doing homework. And then it drops down a little bit, ages 15 to 18. It's 7.5 hours a day, which that was kind of the go-to number for many years. I think it was the Kaiser Family Foundation had done a study back in 2012, and they found that the average teen was consuming about 7.5 hours of media every day. And if you counted media multitasking, it was almost 11 hours. Now, that's, of course, we say, well, that's, not our homeschoolers. Well, let's hope it's not, know. But one thing that I found to be true in a lot of homeschool families is that because we're so efficient, and we should be with training and discipling our children, we're not wasting time giving them nonsense to as filler throughout the day. So as you can get done with your schoolwork in a much more efficient time than what the school does. But the school, if the kids are gone for 8 hours in the government school, they're at least managed for those 8 hours. Mm-hmm. Maybe not so well anymore, even with screens. But what I've talked to a lot of young people who've grown up in homeschool, where they actually had a lot of free time to spend, and they confess that a lot of that time was spent in front of a screen consuming entertainment media, whether it was video games, the internet, unfortunately, things like porn. And those are the things that kind of break your heart and say, wow, we really need to better place a focus on our time. So so definitely this has not been anything new. It's just things aren't getting better. They're getting worse. And we have no ancestral wisdom. This is the thing. I can't go to my parents and say, Mom and Dad, how did you handle smartphones when we were kids? Because there were no smartphones when I was a kid. Mom and Dad, how did you handle the internet in the house? Well, there was no internet in the house. So there's no ancestral wisdom that I can gain. Things have changed so quickly. So it's really incumbent upon us as parents in this generation to develop that wisdom, and to not only apply it in our homes, but my goal is not just to apply it in my home, is to equip my children to be able to pass on new skills, new important areas of discernment and biblical wisdom to apply to this, because I'm not anti-media. I'm not anti-technology. I have websites. I use multimedia. I run a film festival.
Right,
so
right.
definitely not against media or entertainment or technology. It's just we don't handle it very well, and we've proven that time and time again. So we need to learn to handle it better. We need to gain that wisdom, and we need to pass it on to our kids. Now, here's the problem. When I began speaking, it was mostly to teens and young people. And then I realized, as time has gone on, it's like, this is not a teen problem. This is a societal problem that covers all ages. And right now, the biggest hill to climb, as I encourage parents, where do we start? Because, 15, 16 years ago, when I was kind of getting going on this, I was beating this drum, and many people were just like rolling their eyes, like, really, is this really a problem? But that has changed. I hardly meet anybody anymore that doesn't acknowledge we've got a problem.
Right.
They just don't know what steps to take. So that's where I want to kind of step in and help and say, hey, here are some things that can be very beneficial for families. And the first thing, because I'm all about action steps. We can identify the problems. I can talk about the problem for hours and hours and hours. That's an easy thing to do. Finding solutions is difficult. So the first step in regaining focus in this age of digital distractions is for parents to begin to model it for their children. Yeah. Because our children need guidance and they need mentoring, but we know it's hypocritical, and they can see right through that if we're telling them, do what I say, not what I do. Right. And right now, adults are not handling technology well at all. And so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Right. And the kids are not going to learn the things they need to learn if mom and dad don't take this serious and say, you know what, we've got to make some effort here to shift our focus. And one of those things that I've been pointing out for many years is, first of all, is to prioritize presence. You've got to, it's the paradox.
All the way there.
It's the paradox of our culture that we have these great digital tools like we're using right here to create this podcast. We can connect with people around the world. I could be in another country and we could be doing this. I'm only a state away, but nevertheless, we can connect 24/7 to people around the world, but we are neglecting the people across the table from us. Yeah. We're neglecting the people so that's one step that we need to just, in this prioritize presence, make the person in the room the most important person, not so if someone's texting you, if someone's sending you a notification, an instant message, if they shared a video, or, those are all people that are not in your home right now. Right. And so that person has to take the back seat, and we have to retrain our habits to say, you know what, I'm going to, I have my phone is set to vibrate always. It frustrates my wife sometimes when it never rings. I've got a lot of notifications turned off. And I had to train myself over the years to ignore, to say, I'm gonna be disciplined, and I'm not gonna just be checking my phone 50 times a day. It's like the average is like 54 times a day or something. Oh, wow. People pick up their phone and check it. And so I'm not gonna just be checking my phone all day long. I'm going to stay focused, and especially when we're with our family, it's not easy to do because we are habitual now with our phones. We just need to become habitual towards presence. I remember this time I was hanging out with some 20-somethings several years ago. This was before the smartphone. This was still in the flip phone era, but it was texting was a huge thing. I was trying to talk to this 20-year-old guy, and the whole time we were trying to have this conversation. He was a relatively new believer. He was asking me questions, good questions, wanting feedback, and I would try to give him some feedback, and he'd be constantly distracted by his phone. We couldn't have a conversation for 3 or 4 minutes without him. And I said, would you just put that thing away? It's like we're trying to have a conversation here. And he says, he's brushed it off. He goes, check this out. Look what I can do. And he took his phone, and it was, just a flip phone. And so he put it behind his back, and he texted a message for me,
without looking.
Back. He could do it in his pocket. He was so good.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, I'm not impressed.
Yeah.
So
it's a difficult thing because we are so consumed with our phones, especially. We still have our computers, but those sit on a desk, and it's harder to get to those. Even if we have a laptop, you have to be more intentional about going to your computer, opening it up, turning it on, going to whatever page. Whereas with our phones, they're just there in our pocket all the time, and it is one of the most frustrating and heartbreaking things. When you go into a restaurant, I don't know what it is about restaurants, but you go and you see a whole family sitting there, and they cannot sit through a meal without the whole family being on their individual phones, or you'll see two people on a date, whether they're husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend. And I'm like, who would want to date someone like that who just sits on their phone the entire time? Because what it says is, I care more about this person, or I care more about social media than I care about the person that's in front of me.
Yeah, a lot has changed because you and I would be regarded as the digital immigrants. The changes have happened in our lifetime. I mean, you're younger than I am, so maybe you're on the verge of the digital. But our children are regarded as digital natives.
Yeah,
that's all they've ever known.
Right.
But as a digital immigrant that have seen these changes happen suddenly in my lifetime, I remember when cell phones first began to be more common.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went into a restaurant and it was like one person in the restaurant had the cell phone, and they were the obnoxious person that everybody hated because they'd be on their phone and they'd be like, hi.
Right. Showing off.
They were like showing it off. Like, I've got a cell phone. And we'd all be like, just shut up, be quiet, put the thing away. It's like frustrating. But think about how things have changed because nobody even balks at it anymore because everybody has the cell phone. Everybody's on their phone all the time.
All the time.
And, when I was interviewing Dr. David Walsh, I produced a documentary that came out in 2012 called Captivated, Finding Freedom in a Media Captive Culture, and tons of fantastic people to interview. But Dr. David Walsh was talking about attention, and he talked about the two different types of attention, which are reactive attention and focused attention. And God has wired us to react to things that move and that are emotionally stimulating. And he gave a great example. He said, so he's a focused attention is like reading a book. So I'm in my easy chair. I'm focused on this book, but out of the corner of my eye, I see a mouse run across the floorboard. Where's my attention going to go?
Oh yeah.
It's going to go to that mouse. It's like we're wired to respond to movement.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something God has given us. And so, but you don't have to train that. That's just natural. And that's why when I'm going out on a date with my wife and there's this nice little Thai restaurant we like to go to, unfortunately it has a TV on one wall. Usually try to sit where we don't, and they don't have the volume going. But I remember one time we were there and there was a soccer game. Now, no offense to anybody who loves soccer, but I just don't. I don't love it. I don't play it. Certainly don't like to watch it. So I have zero interest in soccer in real life, and less of an interest on a screen. Yet it was so hard for me to not be focusing my attention or my attention being distracted to that screen. Not because I was even interested, but because it's that reactive attention. Right. There's movement, there's light, and it struck me going like, that is such a powerful draw. And so focused attention actually takes effort, and it takes, you have to teach. And many of the ways that children were taught to focus their attention are gone now. We've lost, we've just acquiesced to the culture of distraction, and we're no longer training ourselves or our children to be attentive. And that focused attention and that's part of why I've, kind of titled this, regaining focus.
Yeah.
We need discipline. The Bible talks about runners. It uses the analogy in the Christian life of like an athlete who's training, and that they have self-control in their training. And we need that self-control today if we're going to run the race to win and really thrive in this digital age as Christians. We're going to have good old-fashioned self-control. And so, we need to retrain ourselves to have focused attention.
Right. And it's all about habits in training. You're absolutely right. We are out of time for this episode, but let's come back on Wednesday. We're going to continue talking about this. This is really encouraging. I want to talk about several other things in regards to digital distractions and how we can avoid them in our families. And I want to talk about some of the consequences that our families are facing because of that. But we will be back on Wednesday. Phillip, where can people learn more about you and the ministry that God has you in?
Yes. Well, my catch-all site is philliptelfer.com.
Okay.
And that kind of links everything. I'm a pastor and run the film festival, but my nonprofit ministry is called Media Talk 101. So mediatalk101.org is this distinct focus on media and entertainment.
Okay, sounds great. We'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Phillip. Thank you guys for joining us today. We will be back on Wednesday. We will see you then. Bye.